As many know when it pertains to Disney, most would gravitate towards the classics like The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Little Mermaid. And those movies are part of an era of classics that are most known as the Disney Renaissance, a period from the late 1980s to the late 1990s when Walt Disney Feature Animation returned to producing critically and commercially successful animated films. These were the movies that harken back to the golden age of Disney when they exploded with the first feature-length animated movie that were mostly, of course, musical adaptations of well-known stories where each of them actually worked. Well, almost all of them. And this video is meant to dive into why these stories work so well the way they did, why they appealed to so many of us when we were so young, and even now where most of the successful live action films actually comes from adapting this very era of film to prove how popular it really was. Of course, I'm not going to primarily focus on the style of animation because I really don't know too much to comment on that and other stuff on the behind the scenes, but will still comment on their beauty and what they did to tell the stories that the way they were told. When we look back to the time before the Renaissance, we see an era that isn't well recognized by the majority of the public today, in an era that is mostly now known as the Disney Dark Age. It was referred in two senses, that Disney actually went for more darker storytelling, and just that this was the era of animation that was met with a decline. It is also an era that is classified as the Bronze Age, extending to the time just before Walt Disney's death up until The Little Mermaid, where some were actually good times, but overall the movies weren't just as well renowned as the eras of the Golden and Silver Ages. I mean, looking back on it, some of them were actually disappointing because I actually like some of the films, either both in animation and live action, that came out of Disney in this era, with of course being my favorites out of this time, which was Tron, a cult classic, and also gravitating towards stories like The Great Mouse Detective, directed by the two men who would usher in the Renaissance with their very next film. And with this very film, I think it captured some of the great style of the older films with music and talking animals and a great story that returned some financial success back to the studio after the disappointment of The Black Cauldron the year before. The story had a fantastic villain and a great hero, and of course a great story in that as well. In a way, this film was actually the true beginning of the Renaissance for bringing back the box office and storytelling success to Disney, because of how the next film in Oliver and Company brought in more box office success as well. It wasn't as good as this film where some of the ideas actually ran short, but at the very least Disney was back on the upward trend yet again, finally ending their dark times with the likes of The Little Mermaid and the Renaissance beginning. The Little Mermaid was a story planned very early during Walt Disney's time after the likes of Snow White, but like many other films we know of today, that was unfortunately delayed, but then brought back to both John Musker and Ron Clements being the directors of The Great Mouse Detective to make a new story that was revised into a musical like those Disney classics of old, where they brought in the talent of Alan Menken and Howard Ashman to bring in something amazing to the realm of Disney music. And what we got was Disney's biggest success never seen since the likes of Cinderella. I mean, it's not 100% true, but the movie really did feel harkening back to a story that enticed people to watch when it comes to Disney and so forth. The Little Mermaid was a film about finding who you are and growing from it. The point of this film is having these two characters bridge these different worlds from each other, and how our main character Ariel wants to be part of the human world and found that through Eric, where through the case of Eric, his love is the sea and searching for something new, and how apparently a woman from the sea rescued him and he was so grateful for saving his life that he made a mission to find her. 2 points that the story was trying to connect about our own individual desires, featured in the main heroes and of course the main villain Ursula herself for her own desires to rule the sea. But then again, the heart of this very story was the fact of the growth of King Triton, who shut himself out and refused his daughter to spend time with humans because of how dangerous he perceived them to be, but changed to understand what Ariel actually wanted out of her life and what humans like Eric were actually like by saving his daughter. How he actually sees that what he did was wrong, especially for his daughter who wanted more out of her life that he was actually stopping. The love for her daughter is the most important thing to actually take away from this lesson, and I think using it as a Broadway musical really got those points across that solidified the opinion of what Disney is known for today, which the Renaissance was mainly all about. Once again mentioning the talents of Alan Menken and Howard Ashman, really getting those feelings across with songs like Part of Your World, Under the Sea, and Poor Unfortunate Souls. Like, it truly became the benchmark to how Disney was going to present these stories, despite a few exceptions during the same time frame. Because the only movie that actually stands out from the rest of the films in the Renaissance era is The Rescuers Down Under, which was a project developed before as a sequel to The Rescuers, where it just happened to be a part of this era because it was released after The Little Mermaid. But other than that, it feels more of the same generic style of the older films and weaker in some cases from the original story. The only thing that made it stand out was the fact it had a villain when other prominent Disney sequels would actually forget soon enough, and also introduced the cap system that Disney would use in their animated animated films after, where they went back to straight up successes with one of their most great animated stories ever told in Beauty and the Beast. This film is special in the case of how this wanted to continue adapting what The Little Mermaid did best in terms of musicals, and how Walt Disney also wanted to work on it before, with a story so simple focusing on a beast interacting with such beauty. The story of Beauty and the Beast is everything you expect in an animated musical with the likes of Disney, from the characters to the songs. The thing that made it great was the fact of the beast himself, also surrounded by his animated utensil servants, learning and growing from his own selfish ways, how the Enchantress actually made them go through this whole entire journey and lesson about opening up and learning to love rather than sheltering yourself out. And then we see this opportunity for him to open up with a girl like Belle stuck in a world of books and adventure outside of the townsfolk. How she wants more than this provincial life in this town and the people like Gaston. Gaston, of course, being the greatest character of the film, represents the sheltered mindset and contrast to who the beast of the film really is. A lot of the Renaissance actually represents this idea where one character is portrayed this way physically, but it's actually this relatively normal or eccentric character that is this way, where somehow Gaston has this strong grip on these town to put these ideals into practice against what the characters like the beast are really like, and how he gets that redemption arc at the end because of how she saw someone like him care, an adventure where she went out of her way to save her father at first, but also saved him as well to be the person he was meant to be. The redemption arc that he goes through is everything to me in this story, and of course his servants being the heartwarming crew of the movie, where once again this was all spearheaded by the likes of the songs of Alan Menken and Howard Ashman, where this film is dedicated to him, where he died a few months prior to its release, but still continued to create fantastic music that was also continued within Aladdin. Aladdin brought us back to Muskegon and Clements to create another brilliant story that focused on the friendship of Genie and a street rat. This film is made special considering that Howard Ashman actually pitched the idea of this musical and at least had 3 songs that he worked on in the film, continuing his perfect musical track record that Disney was now on and that all of us now know of before. The songs that he made are the ones that we most recite most of the time. What made Aladdin special was the heart of its bombastic characters, whether it be its villains from Jafar and Iago being overkill at some points, or of course the genius of Robin Williams' performance as Genie and his relationship with Aladdin. I mean, yes, it's heartwarming to continue the same romance of the previous movies with Aladdin and Jasmine, and still adding on with a connection with the princess and a commoner against the laws of the government, but still everything worked well because of their relationship, the trials that they went through together to help each other succeed, with the wishes that he wanted and the promise he made to grant freedom to the genie. And of course, songs like A Whole New World really did bring a whole new world to Disney and audiences around the globe enamored by this new groundbreaking storytelling experience. Aladdin proved at this point that Disney could prove time and time again that they could actually make classics whenever and wherever they went, compared to the past of cautious optimism of their stories. That now, with the success of Aladdin, Disney finally established itself as the main power and force in the industry of animation and movies. Everything about this film is just very beautiful, from the colors and animation combined to highlight the beautifully acted scenes, where you can come to appreciate the fact that there were multiple people who brought these voices to life. I mean, sure, in the cases of Jonathan Freeman and Robin Williams, they sang out their own songs, but when other actors couldn't, in the case of Scott and Linda playing Aladdin and Jasmine, they also got the talents of Brad Kane and Lea Salonga to really capture the beauty of songs like A Whole New World, to bring in a new spice to the movies. It's something that we actually would see in other films in this era, where it shows the amount of work that actually goes into these films, the passion they had to fulfill with their animators, the writers, the composers, the actors, and just everyone who gave it their all for this very film. Every single project that came out of this proved that not one person alone could actually finish these stories to make it what they once were. It was a collaborative effort, and it really showed. And then of course we saw them outdo themselves for their next film in The Lion King. And The Lion King, in my opinion, is really the peak of all of Disney animation. Their best film to date, and it's not hard to see why, and amazing how it used animals to convey this story. Where it is also amazing to discover the fact it was worked on their B team when their A team was actually focused on making Pocahontas, where we all know how that actually turned out instead. The Lion King here attracted people because of its familial story, a simple story of a father and son, losing that and learning to live without that for the majority majority of your life and actually finding yourself in that process that was all caused by your bitter uncle and of course brother in that case. And this film managed to outdo everything from before, especially with its soundtrack, with such breathtaking emotion delivered by Hans Zimmer, who found the message of the father and son very important to him, of course combined with the most recognizable Disney songs made by Tim Rice and Elton John. It's the most balanced film I've ever seen, diving into these emotional dramatic moments with heartfelt comedy. The performances in this film is one of the best that I have ever seen come out of Disney, with my favorites coming out of Jeremy Irons' performance as Scar, creating things like the sly sarcastic villain or the power that James Earl Jones had as Mufasa to represent the strong father figure that Simba actually needed and looked up to. The heart of this story is in fact the circle of life itself, and how there's more to be seen than can ever be seen, and how that translates into Simba's role of how despite his father's death, he will always live within him to do what is right and continue the delicate balance of life itself. It's these simple stories about life and our family that really connects us with them very well. How it is something at least all of us could actually relate to on some level, and what made Disney the company that they are today, and proven with the explosive success of this very film. But it was just that this made them sustain and solidify their power that they were always good at. A story about a bunch of animals that surely influenced generations of today in so many ways. But then of course they released Pocahontas after this to be the pinnacle of this era, which it actually wasn't. Now I don't think Pocahontas is a bad film like some of the modern ones we see today, but it surely was their weakest film of this era. But it was still successful in other ways, like the beauty of its animation and the box office, but beyond that lacked anything meaningful to me and other people for that matter, with a time period that wasn't gotten quite right in their very eyes. But then again, at the very least, I will give it credit for continuing the wonderful music composed by Alan Menken that went on into films like Hunchback of Notre Dame. This was another film that was actually set in France, directed by the same guys who brought us Beauty and the Beast, and one I consider to be Disney's darkest masterpiece and one of my personal favorites. Its tone really showed that Disney could actually tell stories with a more serious edge and still succeed to some degree. The most ambitious they have ever gone to this date, and still wish that they tried to do so to this day. The film also continues that message of separating the men with the monsters featured in Beauty and the Beast with Quasimodo and Frollo. The main message of this movie is to showcase how dark or good a man's heart could be with one of the greatest and darkest Disney villains ever created. And of course, it was all balanced out by the character of Esmeralda, who brings out these two sides where she just wanted to be recognized as a human as any other, compared to where Quasi sees an angel but Frollo sees a demon of desire, and how she recognizes Quasi as a human where others mock him for his appearance as a monster, and challenges everything that Frollo actually brings to the world, using his definitions of what is holy to justify any of its sinful actions to preserve his soul when that is the wrong case. It is just one of those films that stand out for what it did, moving Disney beyond the bubbly figure, and sadly one that they wouldn't go back to because of how safe they want to play things nowadays. But still thankful that at least in the Renaissance they wanted to challenge what could be a fantastic movie, whether it be adult or kid-like in tone. And then again, you move on back to films like Hercules, bringing us back to Musker and Clements with such a fantastic film with the most fun Disney characters like Hades or Phil, with a style that remains to be unique in its own right. The story they wanted to present in Hercules is certainly unique and the most heroic of the bunch to achieve our dreams and who we are. And this film represents what the Renaissance was so good at doing, focusing on these human character stories or animals to finding your own path in life, and I think using legends like Hercules really brings the best and brightest out of that very idea. I don't really have much to say other than how fun this film was, and how it was the best inaccurate portrayal of Greek mythology I've ever seen, where instead I've actually enjoyed films like Mulan a lot more and its empowering messages. Mulan is a great film for showcasing that raw strength is not everything, where most of it relies on Mulan's duty to try to be who she is supposed to be and realizing who she really is, doing the most dangerous thing ever in their society to save their father from dying in battle because of his age. And time again in this very film, Mulan actually proves the worth of a soldier beyond gender or physical capabilities of a person, showing that there are more ways than one to actually fight and save everyone, which she actually does so in the end. The film also shows this fantastic shift between two different moods when they sing in the first half to showcasing their feelings, to then shifting to showcase the realities of war and who they were up against. I love this story for the rejection of such ideas of who we are supposed to be and going against the grain of our peers, where it is all done for the love of our families. Something represented in the final moments of the film, showcasing when she returned to her father, where he says the greatest gift and honor is having her as a daughter, where that is truly the most impactful moment that I've ever saw out of this era of film. It's a great empowering message for females while balancing out what matters matters the most and the reason why this is all done for. To honor the family and doing what is right within your heart. Something that the live action film actually never understood, being one of the most stupidest movies to ever made for one of the most beautiful films ever made in my opinion. And then, like all good things, they must come to an end, and Tarzan actually gave us that. Where at the very least, they ended things on a good note. This story is great for continuing the messages of family and the beast against man argument, where I really like the story showcasing the human compassion of Tarzan for his family in terms of his parents who were killed and his gorilla family who raised him after seeing that happen. And of course, where he finds love in Jane and the Porters, where characters like Clayton actually showcase the descent a man could take because of how heartless he truly is. Like, I really like how over time you see this change in him to become a savage of the jungle where he gets the fate he deserves for being that way. But more importantly, it is the found family message of the film that actually worked, that really hits with characters like Kerchak, learning and growing to accept that, where despite Tarzan actually being human, he is still family to them because of how he proves he loves them by protecting them, and that's why Tarzan actually worked the way it did to close this very era out. Its financial success actually still proved that Disney still had got it on the backdrop with the rise of Pixar and DreamWorks as studios representing the slow end of 2D that we know today and the introduction of 3D. And of course, after the Renaissance end, came an era that was truly underrated and appreciated, which is unfortunate, but also still due to the rise of 3D, understandably, that gave us way to something like the Renaissance in the revival 3D era as we all know. I will create a separate video to why that worked the way it did, but the main point I will drive home here is because it still harkened back to stories like the Renaissance Toad and some of the stuff that they learned today, where everything we know and these stories really take the heart of why we love Disney. These stories work because they focus on the real, relatable human elements that we all know of. And that's why the Renaissance is truly the best Disney era ever. All in all, everything that the Renaissance did really did influence the modern world we see today, and I couldn't be more thankful for it. These stories really showed the passion and creativity that we associate with Disney and proved how much they could endure for lifetimes beyond our death. That through despair and hope, through faith and love, on the path unwinding, this will forever endure in the circle of life. And one can only hope that the future for Disney could actually make something as unique and great as this era gave us all. And with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.